And he came to us for two reasons. One is he learned that there's new law in Minnesota that allows survivors of abuse to do something, to expose offenders and to get accountability because of the statute of limitations change in Minnesota. And that's what prompted him to come to us. And the second thing is he wanted to do something to make sure that Brown would not hurt others, or others like Brown would hurt other kids. And when he came to us recently, we had to tell him quite sadly that we have for years been attempting to get released to the public a list of credibly accused offenders now kept secret and held by the Archbishop and the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis. And we had to tell him that we have made efforts to get that list released because the names of the credibly accused offenders are not known to the public. And so we and he took this action today to file in Ramsey County Court an intervention effort to ask the court that kept the list under seal to now release it to the public, so the public can know who's on that list and who has been determined to be credibly accused, 33 that we know of. So the public can then know who they have to protect their children against, and we can then discern where these offenders are who have been credibly accused in the community. David also is concerned about not just Brown, but the secrecy that he has learned of concerning this list. So the motion that he brought, and we brought on his behalf, is to require and ask the court to require that this list of these credibly accused offenders be released immediately. And the questions that he has, of course, and that concern us is John Brown on that list? Because the correspondence that he has and that we are prepared to show you here shows that they have known that he had offended for a long time and kept him in ministry. And who else is on that list? And who else was kept in ministry for years after they knew, like they did John Brown? So first I'd like to introduce David, and David, just tell us who you are and why you came forward.
Well, my name is David Pasusta. I grew up in a small community. I grew up in a small community of Waverly, Minnesota. Father John Brown was out. He was a pastor in St. Mary's out there when I was 10, 11, 12, maybe 13 years old. And that's when the first occurrence of the molestation of me occurred, up in the rectory. And there was also some molestation when he was a scoutmaster also in the Boy Scouts of America, and there was molestation there too. But I came forward because not only did he molest me, but I know that he molested other people in my community, in my small community. I don't know how these people think about it, but I was standing in the locker room with my boys, with my basketball players, a team that I was on, and he came into the locker room and told us to pull down our shorts, and then he proceeded to check every one of us for what he called a hernia, and I don't think he has any medical background to do that. I don't think even at the time that would be socially acceptable. And, you know, so I know that there's a lot of people that were fondled by him. I also came forward, and I could have used anonymous John Doe, but I decided to use my name in hopes that maybe some of the people that I was in school with will think about it. If it's affected their lives like it's affected me, that they would come forward and try to get some type of accountability from this priest or ex-priest. By the way, they took his collar away back in 2001, I believe, or 2002, where he wasn't able to say Mass anymore. They also moved him out of a Boy Scout camp that he was living in a trailer house adjacent to the Boy Scout camp. And in the letter it states that he did odd jobs in the Boy Scout camp. They removed him out of there, and now he's in a nursing home somewhere. But my concern is accountability on his part, because they have been hiding this person. I went into counseling in 2010 because of the pain and suffering that I've had over the last 50 years dealing with it, and the behavior maybe that I used to get rid of the pain was always in a negative fashion, and I decided to come and try to heal myself in a positive fashion.
David, when you went into counseling, you started to process this in a way to help yourself get better.
Absolutely.
And then, before you went into counseling, however, or sometime after you went into counseling, you actually went to the Archdiocese to get information about Brown and his history, and to get them to take some action, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Tell us what you did, who you went to, and what you wanted them to do, and what happened.
Okay. Well, first I just went through the Archdiocese asking where he was, because I wanted to meet with them, and that was, I got a call back from a deacon. I can't remember his name, but he said they have no record of him, they don't know where he is, which was basically a total lie, because they were paying for his nursing home, I'm sure.
That was Deacon Russ, R-U-S-S.
Yes.
Schupp, S-C-H-O-E-P.
I believe that was him, yes.
Yeah.
You know, so they denied me access to him. And then I started seeing my psychologist, trying to heal. And with the help of him, he was able to contact Kevin McDonough, who was the Vicar General at the time that the first initial, back in '92, when I think they decided that John Brown was a dangerous person, or a potentially dangerous person. So I met with Kevin McDonough probably 4 or 5 times through my my psychologist. He showed up, he came into my sessions, and we talked, and this is how I procured these letters, so he could show that they were doing something
David,
about him.
in your meetings with then Vicar General, or Kevin McDonough, who had been the Vicar General for the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis, did you ask for and get some information concerning Brown and his history, and did you get a letter from McDonough?
I did, actually taken out of his file, according to Kevin McDonough.
Let's put that letter up. The letter is dated April 24th, 1992. It's actually to Gary Schoner, and it is from then Kevin McDonough, the Vicar General, copied to Father Brown, copied to then Archbishop Roach, and copied to Bishop Welsh, W-E-L-S-H. And the letter given to David at that time is important because it reflects that at that time they knew that Brown had a history of inappropriate conduct, effectively sexual molestation of children. And at the second paragraph, they recite in 1992, he lives in a trailer house on land attached to a Boy Scout campground in southern Minnesota. So at that time they knew he was living close to the Boy Scout campground. Did you have any dealings with him and the Boy Scouts back then?
No, not in 92, but back in 90, or 61, 62, I didn't stay in the Boy Scouts too long because of his behavior toward me. I kind of got out of the Boy Scouts. I felt like I was in jeopardy because of some of his actions towards me. But he actually brought in the Boy Scouts to Waverly. There was no Boy Scout troop until he showed up, and he brought it into Waverly and developed this Boy Scout where we went camping and all the things that the Boy Scouts would instill, and he was a scoutmaster. So I did have what I called earlier the whiskers from him at least 3 times, where my friends to hold me down, and he'd pull my pants down to about the pubic area. I was prepubescent at that time, but then he'd always have a 3-day growth of his beard, and then he'd rub his face back and forth right about the pubic bone, and it was quite uncomfortable. It was, at the time I didn't know what was going on, but in hindsight, I've come to realize that this was kind of a prey-predator type of behavior on his part.
And David, the conduct that he engaged in with you, the general contact that he made with you, became well known to the Archdiocese, and it's reflected in the letter at page 2. When they confronted him in 1992, Father Brown, and I quote from it at this 3rd paragraph, it states, Father Brown denies any of this contact was sexual in nature. He recognizes its inappropriateness from the point of view of people's perception and has been concerned from time to time, particularly in recent years, that it might come back against him. On the other hand, he is absolutely adamant that there was no element of sexual attraction on his part, nor was there any ever behavior beyond the examination itself. And what's most alarming is not just that he's in denial around what it really is, but he admits that he can't control himself, and he's been doing it for a long time. And the scariest part is reflected in the last of the 2nd paragraph, where they state, and they make a decision then, that seems to be a practice that continues to this day. They state, the alternative is that he is masking from himself and or from others a level of sexual fascination with adolescents that makes his current living situation a dangerous one. So they recognize through his own admissions and through the history they have in 92 that he's dangerous. And what do? They continue him in ministry. And in the history that you have, do we have the history, Stacy?
Yeah, it's in the folders.
Okay, put the history up for a moment. It's in the folders that you have. But in the history that we have concerning this priest, from the date of the abuse of David in the early 60s, he was assigned to 7 different parishes until his retirement in 1991 in 6 different communities. Without notice or warning, or alerting any of the parishioners, the police, the public, or the people about the danger that they knew about. And so when David came to us just recently and reported both what happened to him and what he learned from the Archdiocese, and that he was concerned about the other kids, and we told him that the Archdiocese has this list that for years we have tried to unseal, he asked us to take action immediately. And indeed, he will bring an action, but immediate action is required. And so this morning, armed with his courage and this information, we filed this intervention effort. And that is to intervene in the case that we had brought earlier to ask the court, the Ramsey County District Court, to unseal the list that had been kept secret at the request of the Archdiocese and the Archbishop, and that remains secret at the request of the Archbishop and the Archdiocese, and that on that list there are 33 names of credibly accused offenders. And this intervention action is designed to get that information released, to satisfy David's concerns and the concerns that we all have and that we have had for years, that they continue to keep secrets at the peril of children in this community and others like it. And so what needs to be said is that it is this kind of courage that we are grateful for, because until these names are known, and until this list and others like it in Minnesota are released by the bishops, the community cannot be warned about Brown, whether he's on the list or not, and others like him, and know that there are perils that are yet to be known, and now only known by a small group of people, namely the Archbishop and his people. We sadly got this list, and we filed this list in the case in, was that 2010, Mike?
2009.
In 2009. And we filed it with the idea of having it released publicly. The Archdiocese immediately went into court and asked the court to keep it under seal, and the court kept it under seal because the trial was so close. That case then went to the Supreme Court, and we asked again that the case and the list be released. At that time, it was denied because the judge said he didn't think he had the legal power to release the list. The legal term he used was lack of jurisdiction. And so we have been deeply, deeply concerned about this lack of disclosure, this lack of exposure, this adherence to secrecy. So we're really deeply grateful to David for bringing in this letter that demonstrates the imperative, bringing to us his tragic experience years and decades ago and how he's processed that, and his motivation to do something to protect kids, to expose the offenders. And if Brown is no longer at risk because he's in the nursing home, he certainly was for 25 years after they knew he had offended in '82. So how many others are there on that list? Is Brown on that list? And why and how can this Archbishop still persist in keeping this secret at this day and in this time? And so today, on David's shoulders we stand in urging the Archdiocese to release this list, and every diocese in Minnesota who have kept same and similar lists secret to release them. The reality is that in 2002, every diocese and every bishop assembled such a list. And to date, as is reported on bishopaccountability.org, 30 dioceses of the 177 across the country have released similar lists. So there is a precedent for it, and there's also a compelling imperative, and now legal imperative, and that's why we have sought the help of the court in getting this addressed as quickly as we can. And we can't wait any longer for David's case to go through the courts, because that will take too much time. So thus, we've brought this intervention action to force and compel this disclosure for the benefit of those kids in this community that are peril, and for the benefit of the parents who don't know who these credibly accused offenders are, where they're living, and where they're working. And when the Archdiocese says they're no longer in ministry, that gives us no comfort, because they are, like John Brown, unable to control themselves. So wherever they are at danger. They are at risk, just like is said in this letter. There is a danger. And until that list is released, it is an imminent peril. And so, thank you, David, for this, and your courage and your desire.
You're welcome.
And coming forward with your painful truth, getting the help, sharing it with us, and then going public. You did not have to come here today and use your name. We could have used a pseudonym. We could have used a John Doe, but you said, no, I need to stand up. And we say thank you to you for standing up.
You're welcome. I appreciate everybody that showed up. I would hope that people that were put in the same situation as I was through the behaviors of John Brown, if they don't at least seek legal help, perhaps they can seek some type of psychological help, if in fact they need it. And I know I struggled for 50 years with what happened to me, and I can't believe that some of my friends probably struggled too with the same situation. So.
And what is evident here is the Archdiocese officials since 1992 knew that this man posed a danger, and since 1992 has kept his identity and that danger from the public and from us and from the people. And how many kids were abused and violated in that time, and how many other John Browns are there both on that list and at peril, while they and the Archdiocese and the Archbishop and the bishops in Minnesota adhere to this strict policy of secrecy and self-protection instead of protection of the kids. We try to give him answers that were unsatisfactory, because the Archdiocese has chosen and made the choice to adhere to the past practices of secrecy and self-protection. And it's the courage of this survivor and others like him that are now bringing light to darkness. And it's also the legislature that changed the law that gives David and other survivors like him an opportunity to bring an action, to force the list, to seek damages, to get relief and expose offenders. And that change in law in Minnesota brings great hope and promise, not only to David, but to all of us that are interested in protecting our youth. Any questions?
Where is Mr. Brown living now?
Brown is currently in a nursing home. The records, do we know where the nursing home is? It's in Maplewood. We can get an address. At the time that David confronted Brown, David, I'd like you to tell us about you wanted to confront Brown, and Kevin McDonough helped you do that.
Yes, he did.
and you began to ask Brown questions, and he started to answer questions. Tell us a little bit about that confrontation, what Brown first told you, and then how that got interrupted or stopped.
Well, it took a long time, and I had to be prepared myself to confront him, but I was willing, you know, and it's not like a shouting match or anything like that. I confronted him by telling him what he did to me and others was inappropriate, it was wrong, it hurt me from the moment that he molested me, and that it wasn't right for him to do what he did. Now, I wanted to ask some questions. I had a list of maybe 8 or 10 questions I wanted to ask him. It's like, when did they remove you? I wanted him to tell me. When did they remove you from the Boy Scout camp, and why? When did they take your collar away, and why? And then I wanted to tell him some of my adulthood experiences, some of my behaviors that were probably self-destructive. I know they were self-destructive. And at that point, my psychologist, Stan, and I left the room, and he was gonna, Mr. McDonough was gonna present these questions to Brown. The whole time that I confronted Brown, he didn't say too much. I asked him if he was in the military, because I didn't believe that he was, although he wore fatigues, I remember, in Boy Scout camps with his name Brown, that probably any one of us could get at the Army surplus store with the name Brown on it. So I didn't believe him, and this was later on, I questioned that, but he knew, oh yeah, he knew he was in Korea, and he was real adamant about that, but he was very unclear about some of the things that I told him that he had done to me. He couldn't remember, or he didn't recall, so it was kind of memory for some things, not memory for other things.
David, when you asked him and you had these questions about when he'd been removed, why he'd been transferred, when he'd had his collar taken, and what actions the Archdiocese had taken, and you asked those questions, is that when Father McDonough intervened?
Yeah, he kind of stopped the intervention at that point. We left. My psychologist and I left the room for a few minutes, you know, all on the assumption that he was going to ask Brown these questions, and I don't believe that he did. He came back maybe 7-10 minutes later and said, "That's it." He doesn't recall. He doesn't feel like answering those questions, and his one of the main character people that were involved with this intervention was his niece, who I believe is legal guardian. I believe she coached him not to say anything, because the intervention was probably no more than 40 minutes where I spoke to him, and he said very little.
So
Was it McDonough who said he doesn't recall, he doesn't want to answer any more questions?
Right, he said that, you know, it's fatigue. He's 90, early 90s now, you know, so. You know.
When did this happen?
This happened in April of 2012.
So in April of 2012, he's probably in his 90s or late 80s.
Early 90s, you know, he's probably 92, 93 perhaps.
So in April of 2012, David wants answers. He wants answers from Brown. He basically confronts him with what he did to him, and he wants answers about how he had been handled over the years. And when he began to ask the questions about what the Archdiocese did after they knew, and whether they moved him and how it had happened, that's when Kevin McDonough again intervened to keep, we believe, that information secret from David for the same reasons we believe this Archbishop is keeping this list secret from the people.
I do want to point out that Father McDonough was very helpful
Yes?
in getting this intervention set up.
Okay. The question that I just got is Brown on the list. And you know, we got this list. We required the Archdiocese to turn it over to us in this case, and we got possession of it. And as soon as we did, we filed it with the court. And as soon as we did, the Archdiocese made a motion to seal it. And as a result, the court ordered it sealed, which means I can't answer the question, is Brown on the list? I can't answer it. And it makes me sick and it makes me scared, because I can't tell you what we know about who's on that list and who's not on that list. And that's evermore why we brought this particular action this morning, so that not only we can tell, but that you and the rest of the members of this community can know something that we know. Yes.
Do you know how many of them are still alive?
We can't answer that question because we've been ordered, because the Archdiocese ordered it to be sealed. That means that our lips are sealed, and as an officer of the court,
Who's
I'm
the judge who sealed it?
Greg Johnson.
Is he the judge that you were making this application to?
He's no, right now he has not been assigned a judge yet, so we do not know who's going to hear the intervention.
He's no longer on the bench?
He's on the bench still, so whether he is the one or not, will,
I don't think he's on civil anymore.
yeah.
We might go to something else.
So you expect he will be assigned to someone else because he's no longer on the civil side?
No.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
You don't know?
We don't know who's going to be in front of, but we do know that we're moving as fast as we can to get this information out and not be constrained from revealing it to the public and answering the call.
Archbishop Binns was the one who had you know, Archbishop Binns, he was the Archbishop of St. Paul?
Yeah, Archbishop Binns was one of the archbishops that preceded John Roche at the time of
First name?
Leo.
Leo.
Mhm. And Archbishop Binns, this letter reflects, had a history and some knowledge of this. And the letter that's in your packets of 1992 to Gary Schoner, the counselor at the Walk-In Center, from Archbishop McDonough, reflects that Roche was then the archbishop who followed Binns. And what the letter reflects, as taken from the file of Brown, is that they had known and did know about this guy and chose to keep him in ministry after they knew of the danger, to use their words, of the danger for 25 years, at least until his retirement. And until this day, he had not been identified as a credibly accused offender or a dangerous risk to the public.
Sister, are you employed?
Yes,
What kind of work do you do?
I am a medical lab technician at a hospital in Minneapolis.
And can you tell us how this sexual abuse affected you in your life?
Well, it was very traumatic from the first time. A quick history on it was, he actually called up my parents, asked them if I would come up to the rectory. It was a warm summer night, I remember. My dad was very religious. People in Waverly, there was two powerful people in Waverly. There was the banker and the parish priest. Those were the two most powerful people. And my father, being very religious, he sent me up there right away. He actually told my parents what he was going to do. He was going to talk about the birds and the bees. So he was, even then, he was gathering the confidence from my parents. So I went up there. We never talked about the birds and bees. He asked sexually explicit questions like, do I know what jacking off is? Things like that. Do I know what testicles are? Do I know what a penis is? Do I know what a scrotum is? Well, at that first encounter was, he pulled my pants down and he showed me what my penis was, and he showed me what my scrotum was by tugging on it. So, although I thought we were talking, I was like 10 or 11, I thought we were talking about the birds and the bees. We never mentioned reproduction. He did ask me if I knew what sperm was. But other than that, there was no female genitalia mentioned, and he
How
was.
has it affected your life?
It affected me in a very. I started immediately. I was traumatized. I was happy to be out of the rectory. I quit becoming an altar boy within probably 5-6 months. I just decided I wouldn't show up anymore. I started missing mass on Sundays, you know, much to, you know, my father, like he was really religious and he had a hard time with that, but I couldn't tell him why. There was no one to tell. There was no one to bring this, and I didn't know that I was really being affected. I mean, you know, when I left the rectory on the first time, I thought we talked about the birds and the bees, which wasn't so at all. He just wanted information on other kids, you know, if they were sexually active, things like, you know, if so-and-so is jacking off, or who is. If you do know, tell me. You know, he was, and the whole time he was very excited sexually. Again, this is all in hindsight because I didn't know anything. His nose was flared, he was perspiring, he was rocking back and forth in his rocking chair or straddle lounger, I can't remember what the vehicle he was sitting in, but he was very excited.
David, he did this a number of times to you?
Yes.
And you also believe there are a number of other kids he was around.
Yeah.
The letter also reflects at the top of the first page, he said he did this about 15 times between 1948 and 1966. The letter also says that in 1966, parents complained to Archbishop then Binz, B-I-N-Z, and they confronted Brown, and who realized how easily this sort of behavior could be misunderstood. And he said he had not done so since. So in 1966, they made another choice, and that was to allow him to continue in ministry for another 25 or more years. And how many other Davids there are out there, we don't know, but what those Davids and others by different names who had the same experience now have permission under the law to come forward, to share the secret, and to do so privately, and not have to use their name the way David courageously chose to do so today. And so to him we're grateful, and on behalf of all those other kids who chose to take some action to protect and exercise some courage in doing this today, we're grateful, because it's a cowardice by this archdiocese that continues to adhere to secrecy and self-protection, and there's no other explanation for it. Thank you, David.
You're welcome.